What if I told you that the #1 fishing rule your grandpa taught you is the exact reason you are not catching anything right now? We have all heard it a million times before. When the summer heat gets brutal, you have to go deep and drag the bottom to find the fish. It is the golden rule of July fishing. But here is the hard truth that nobody wants to admit. Dragging the bottom in the middle of the summer is practically a guaranteed way to keep your live well completely empty. In this video, we are going to look at the massive mistake almost everyone makes when the water gets hot. I'm going to show you exactly why your favorite bottom baits are being completely ignored by the fish right now. You are going to discover a hidden wall under the water that changes everything. And I promise you, once you understand this, you will never look at summer fishing the same way again. So tell me down in the comments before we start, are you a stubborn bottom dragger, or have you already figured out the summer secret? To understand why we fail, we have to look at why we do what we do. This topic is incredibly important because summer fishing breaks the spirits of so many good anglers. You start the year strong in the spring, catching fish left and right. But then July hits, the water temperature skyrockets, and suddenly the lake feels dead. For generations, the conventional wisdom has been simple. Fish do not have air conditioning, so when the surface gets too hot, they must go down deep to the bottom to cool off. It makes perfect logical sense to us humans. So, we tie on our heaviest jigs, our big heavy sinkers, and we drag the bottom of the lake for hours on end, sweating and burning in the sun. We do it year after year, trip after trip, because it is comfortable. It is what we know. Feeling that weight bounce across the rocks gives us the illusion that we are doing things right. We are terrified of fishing the middle of the water column because we cannot feel anything. But clinging to this old belief is exactly what is killing your success. Let us start with that stubborn morning routine we all know too well. You wake up before dawn, launch the boat, and head straight to your favorite deep water point. It is a blazing hot morning in the middle of July. The sweat is already starting to form on your forehead, even though the sun just came up. You tie on a heavy jig or a big rig, cast it out, and let it sink all the way down into the dark depths. You drag it slowly. You feel every single rock, every piece of gravel, and every sunken log. You are doing everything exactly the way you were taught. You wait for that familiar thump on the end of the line. But an hour goes by, then 2 hours go by, the sun gets higher, the heat gets worse, and your live well is bone dry. You start scratching your head and wondering if the lake is just dead today. You might even blame the weather front or the moon phase. But the harsh reality is that you are making a massive mistake. Dragging the bottom right now is the exact reason you are not catching a single thing. You are literally presenting your bait in a complete wasteland. Sitting out there baking in the sun while stubbornly scraping the mud is just wasting your precious weekend. Now consider the illusion of the deep structure that you love so much. For most of the year, those deep rocky points, ledges and channel swings are absolute gold mines. We all have that one secret spot where we can drag a plastic worm and pull out a monster fish. So naturally, when July rolls around and the surface water feels like a warm bathtub, your brain tells you to go right back to that deep spot. Your brain says that the fish must be down there seeking refuge from the blistering heat above. You picture all those big predators stacked up tight to a rock pile in 30 feet of water, just waiting for your bait to bump them right on the nose. You keep your rod tip low and drag that heavy lead right through what you think is their living room. But what you do not realize is that you are dragging your expensive lures through an empty neighborhood. The fish are simply not there. Or if they are down there, they are completely dead to the world. You are fishing a memory of what worked in May or October. But this is the middle of the summer, and the rules are completely flipped upside down. You have to stop trusting your old memories. Let us talk about the actual science of the summer bake. We need to understand what is happening to the water in your lake during July. Water is not just one big mixed bowl of liquid. As the relentless summer sun beats down day after day, the top layer of the lake absorbs all that intense heat. This top layer becomes very warm and very light. Meanwhile, the water deep down at the bottom stays very cold and heavy. Because the warm water is light and the cold water is heavy, they stop mixing together. The lake literally divides itself into separate layers, kind of like oil and water in a salad dressing bottle. This is a natural process that happens in almost every lake across the country when the summer peaks. As fishermen, we feel that hot water on the surface and assume the fish hate it. We assume they want to be as deep as possible where it is nice and chilly. But we are only looking at temperature. We are completely forgetting about the single most important thing a fish needs to survive, and that is oxygen. Temperature does not matter at all if the fish cannot breathe. Here is the invisible barrier that ruins your day. It is called the thermocline. If you take away anything from this video, let it be this word. The thermocline is a harsh dividing line in the water column where the temperature drops extremely rapidly. It is the ceiling that separates the hot surface water from the cold bottom water. Above the thermocline, the water is warm, but it is constantly mixed by the wind, so it is absolutely full of rich oxygen. Below the thermocline, the water is wonderfully cool, but because it never mixes with the surface air during the summer, it slowly runs out of oxygen. That thermocline acts like a solid glass floor. Depending on your lake, it might be 10 feet down, or it might be 20 feet down, but it is always there in July. When you cast your heavy jig out and let it sink 30 feet down to the bottom, it punches right through that invisible barrier. Your bait leaves the living zone and enters a place where fish biologically cannot spend much time. You are fishing under the floorboards of the lake. Think about the dead water zone you are casting into. Below that thermocline, things get really grim in the middle of summer. Organic matter like dead algae, leaves, and weeds sink to the bottom and start to rot. That rotting process eats up whatever tiny bit of oxygen is left down there. By the time July is in full swing, the bottom 30 feet of your lake might have literally zero dissolved oxygen. It becomes an absolute dead zone. Nothing can live there for very long. No bait fish, no crawdads, and definitely no big bass or walleye. Yet, where is your bait? You are dragging your heavy sinker right through that toxic, oxygen-deprived wasteland. You are bumping it over rocks that haven't seen a living creature in 3 weeks. You are meticulously working your lure in a place where a fish would literally suffocate if it stayed there. It does not matter if your lure is the most realistic, expensive Japanese bait ever made. It does not matter if you have smeared it with the best scent on the market. If there is no oxygen, there are no feeding fish. It is time to crush the myth of the deep, cool refuge. The old-timers always told us that fish go deep to find the cold water when it gets hot. And yes, a fish is cold-blooded and prefers cooler temperatures. But given the choice between suffocating in cool water or breathing comfortably in warm water, the fish will choose to breathe every single time. They have to. They will push up as high as they need to in order to find good oxygen, even if that means sitting in water that feels uncomfortably warm. They will tolerate the heat of the summer just to survive. So when you picture those fish hunkered down on the deep mud, trying to stay cool, you are painting a false picture in your head. They are not down there hiding in the basement. They have been forced out of the basement by bad air quality. This is the fundamental misunderstanding that leaves so many anglers frustrated. You are providing room service to a hotel room that has been locked and abandoned for the season. So where are the fish actually living in the dead of summer? This is the million-dollar question. If they cannot go to the bottom because there is no air, and they do not want to be on the blazing hot surface because the sun is too bright, they have to find a compromise. They suspend. They hover right in the middle of the water column. They will find that sweet spot right at or slightly above the thermocline. Here, they have enough oxygen to breathe, and the water is slightly cooler than the absolute surface. They just float there, suspended in open water, like ghosts hanging in the middle of an empty room. They might be sitting 15 feet down over 40 feet of water. They are nowhere near the bottom, and they are nowhere near the top. They are completely unattached to the physical structure of the lake. This is why you can drag the bottom all day and never get a bite. Your bait is passing 20 feet directly beneath the fish. You are quite literally flying under their radar. Let us talk about the suspended fish nightmare. Ask any professional angler what the hardest fish in the world to catch is, and they will tell you it is a suspended fish in the middle of the summer. When fish suspend, they are usually in a neutral or negative feeding mood. They are just trying to survive the heat of the day. They are not actively cruising around looking for a meal. More importantly, fish have eyes placed on the upper part of their head. They naturally look forward and look up. They very rarely look down, especially when they are suspended high in the water column. So when your heavy bait goes rocketing past them and lands in the mud way below them, they do not even notice it. And even if they did see it sink, they are absolutely not going to dive down into the suffocating dead zone to chase it. Why would a predator leave its comfortable oxygen level to swim down into a zone where it cannot breathe, just to eat a piece of plastic? They simply will not do it. Your bottom presentation is completely eliminated from their menu. Picture what happens when your bait actually hits the mud. Let us imagine the cast. You throw your rig out, and it sinks quickly. It passes through the warm surface water, drops past the suspended fish who ignore it, punches through the thermocline, and smashes into the bottom. In a lot of lakes, the bottom below the thermocline is covered in a layer of black, smelly muck because of all the decaying matter. Your heavy sinker buries itself right into that sludge. When you drag it, you stir up a cloud of stinking black mud. The bait you paid $10 for is now completely hidden in a cloud of silt in an area devoid of life. Sometimes you reel your bait in, and it has a weird black film on it, or it smells faintly like rotten eggs. That is the smell of the dead zone. That is sulfur from the rotting bottom. If your bait comes back smelling like a swamp, that is the ultimate sign that you are fishing way too deep. You are fishing in the graveyard, and nobody is home to eat your bait. Here is the visual reality of dragging a jig through this graveyard. Imagine standing in an empty parking lot in the middle of the night, dragging a piece of string on the ground. That is what you are doing to the fish. You are relying entirely on the physical sensation of the rocks to tell you that you are fishing correctly. You feel a bump, bump, bump on your rod tip, and your brain releases a little bit of dopamine because it feels like fishing. We are addicted to feeling the bottom. It gives us a sense of control. When we fish the middle of the water column, we feel nothing but the water resistance, and that makes us anxious. We feel like we are doing it wrong if we are not hitting things. But you have to break this psychological addiction to the bottom. In July, feeling the bottom is a lie. That physical contact is tricking you into wasting your time. You have to learn to be comfortable fishing in the void, swimming your bait through open space where the fish are actually hovering. It is so hard to ignore Grandpa's advice. We all learned to fish from someone older, and their advice was usually spot on. Go deep in the summer is a rule etched in stone. But you have to remember that 30 or 40 years ago, our understanding of lake biology and thermoclines was not as widespread among everyday fishermen. They caught fish deep because they were probably fishing early in the morning, or fishing current on a river, or fishing reservoirs where water is pulled through a dam, which mixes the water and breaks up the dead zone. But on a typical still lake in the middle of July, the old rules do not apply. Modern electronics and underwater cameras have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that fish abandon the deep bottom during the peak heat. You have to be willing to break tradition if you want to bend your rod. Staying stubborn and loyal to a technique just because it is old school is the fast track to a miserable day on the water. So, how do we start reading the signs on the water? If the bottom is dead, you have to look for life, and the best indicator of life is bait fish. Shad, shiners, minnows, whatever lives in your lake. Bait fish are extremely sensitive to oxygen levels. They will never ever swim down into the dead zone. If you pay attention, you will see them flickering near the surface, or you will see schools of them hovering halfway down. Wherever the bait fish draw the line, that is where the predators draw the line. If you are fishing on a calm July morning, and you see dimples on the surface from bait fish over 60 feet of water, that tells you everything you need to know. The food chain is happening high up in the water column. The big fish are going to be lurking just below those bait schools, looking up. If you cast a bottom-bouncing rig right past all that activity and sink it to the bottom, you are literally ignoring the buffet line to go look for scraps in the dumps. This brings us to the great sonar lie. We all have depth finders on our boats now. You idle over a deep point, and you look at your screen. You see the hard yellow line of the bottom, and right above it, you see a bunch of dots and arches. Your heart rate jumps. You yell to your buddy that the fish are stacked on the bottom. You drop your baits down, and nothing happens. You drag it for an hour, and nothing happens. Why? Because those dots on the bottom in July are rarely active game fish. They might be rough fish like carp or suckers that can tolerate incredibly low oxygen. They might be rocks or sunken timber that the sonar is misreading. Or it might be fish that are so incredibly lethargic from the bad water that they could not open their mouths even if they wanted to. Meanwhile, if you look halfway up your screen, you might see a faint fuzzy line stretching across the display. That fuzzy line is the thermocline. And those scattered arches hovering just above it, those are the active, biting fish that you are completely ignoring. You have to completely change your perspective on the strike zone. In the spring and fall, the strike zone is basically the floor of the lake. But in July, the strike zone is a horizontal band suspended in the middle of nothing. To catch these fish, you have to bring the bait up to their level. You have to present your lure right in their face or slightly above their head. If a bass is suspended 15 feet down, your bait needs to be running at 12 or 14 feet. If it runs at 20 feet, you lose. This means you have to put down the heavy jigs and the Carolina rigs. You have to stop dragging. You need to start casting baits that you can control the depth of. You need to count your baits down, cast it out, count to 10 to let it sink to the right depth, and then start a slow, steady retrieve. You have to keep the bait swimming right through that magic layer of water where the oxygen is good and the fish are comfortable. Getting a reaction strike in the middle column is your best weapon. Remember how we said suspended fish are hard to catch because they are not actively feeding? You cannot finesse a fish that does not want to eat. You have to force them to react. You need a bait that triggers their predatory instinct before their brain can tell them not to eat it. This is where big, deep-diving crankbaits shine. If you crank a bait down so it crashes right through the school of suspended fish, they will often bite it purely out of aggression. The same goes for heavy swim baits or big jerk baits. You want something that moves erratically right in front of their eyes. When they are hovering there half asleep in the July heat, a flash of silver darting over their head is sometimes the only thing that will make them snap. You are not trying to feed them a slow, crawling meal. You are trying to pick a fight with them in the middle of the water column. There is one exception where a bottom technique can be modified to work, and that is a suspended drop shot. If you absolutely insist on using a vertical presentation, you have to rig it way differently than you do in the spring. Instead of having your hook a few inches above your weight, you might need a leader that is 4, 5, or even 6 feet long. You let the weight crash through the thermocline and sit in the dead zone mud, but your incredibly long leader keeps the actual plastic worm floating high up above the bad water, right in the faces of the suspended fish. This allows you to keep the bait perfectly still in the strike zone without suffocating the presentation. It feels incredibly weird to cast a rig with a 6-foot gap between the hook and the weight, but when the fish are hovering a fathom off the bottom, it is sometimes the only way to hold a bait exactly where they live. We also have to respect the transition periods of the day. There is a very narrow window in July where bottom fishing can still work, and you need to recognize it. In the very early morning, just as the sun is barely cracking the horizon, or late in the evening when the shadows get long, the fish might briefly move out of the suspended zone and push up into the very shallow water near the bank to hunt. I am talking about water that is only 2 or 3 feet deep. In these shallow areas, the water cools off slightly overnight, and the wind keeps the oxygen high all the way to the bottom. For a short hour or two, you can pitch a jig to the shallow weeds or rocks and get bit. But the second that summer sun gets high and starts baking the shallows, those fish will retreat right back out to the deep open water and suspend again. If you keep dragging the bottom after 9 in the morning, you are officially wasting your time. Let us talk about the psychology of breaking this bad fishing habit. It is incredibly frustrating to change tactics when you are baking in the sun. When you are hot, sweaty, and tired, you naturally revert to what takes the least amount of mental effort. Chucking a heavy rig out and slowly dragging it requires zero brain power. You can sit on your boat seat, drink a cold soda, and basically go to sleep. Actively counting down a swim bait, maintaining a specific depth, and winding it through open water requires focus. It requires you to be engaged. It feels like a lot of work when you are already exhausted by the heat. But you have to ask yourself, Do you want to take a nap on the lake, or do you want to catch fish? You have to force yourself to cut off the heavy bottom rigs. Put them in the rod locker so you are not tempted to use them. Commit to fishing the middle of the water column for 1 whole hour and watch what happens. Here is a real-life scenario of switching tactics and saving the day. I have a buddy who fishes tournaments every weekend. One July he was struggling hard. He was fishing a beautiful deep rock pile in 30 feet of water with a football jig. He graphed fish there, but he dragged that jig for 4 hours without a single tap. He was ready to pack up and go home in defeat. Finally, out of pure frustration, he tied on a heavy swim bait. He threw it out over that same rock pile, let it sink about 15 feet down, and just started reeling it through the open water above the rocks. On his third cast, a 5-pounder absolutely smashed it. The fish were there the whole time, hovering 15 feet off the bottom, totally ignoring his jig in the mud. By simply bringing the bait up out of the dead zone and putting it in front of their faces, he filled his Livewell in less than an hour. It was the exact same spot, just a completely different vertical zone. So the final adjustments for your next July trip come down to this. First, acknowledge that the bottom of the lake is likely a dead zone right now, except that the fish are suspended and looking up. Second, put away the heavy bottom dragging baits once the sun gets high. Third, look for bait fish on the surface or use your electronics to find that fuzzy Thermocline line. And fourth, commit to throwing moving baits or suspended baits in the middle of the water column. Fish over their heads, not under their bellies. Stop waiting for the fish to go to the bottom, because they are not going down there to suffocate. If you make this mental shift, you will suddenly find that July is not the Dead Sea after all. You will start getting those aggressive reaction strikes, while everyone else on the lake is sitting there roasting in the sun, staring at a slack line, and complaining that the fish simply are not biting today. The biggest takeaway here is realizing that the lake completely changes its physical rules in the middle of summer. Discovering the reality of the thermocline and the dead zone is the ultimate turning point for any fisherman. It is that wow moment when you finally understand why you have been getting skunked every single July. The fish did not disappear, and they did not stop eating. They just moved upstairs to get some fresh air, and you were stubbornly knocking on the basement door. By lifting your bait out of the mud and swimming it through the middle of the water column, you are finally putting your lure where the fish can actually see it and breathe comfortably while they chase it. It completely changes your approach from hoping for a lucky bite to actively hunting suspended predators. Thank you guys so much for watching and hanging out today. If this video helped you realize why your summer fishing has been tough, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the community. Drop a like on the video to help us out, and do not forget to leave a comment below. I want to know, now that you know the bottom is dead, what is the first bait you are going to tie on for your next July trip? Let's talk about it in the comments, and I will see you out on the water.